Alright, so before I start this video entirely, I need to show you guys my framed Chihayafuru. This is the last color page from the last chapter. Anyway, the last video was pretty serious, so today we are going to be keeping it much more chill. I had someone ask me before if I was ever going to do an end of the month manga wrap up, and I figured no better time to do it than now. I do like doing more serious essay content, but I do also like manga and talking about it. So I need videos like this every now and then just to have some fun. This kind of video is something I probably won't do consistently, but I do want to show you guys what I've been reading, what I would recommend, and my thoughts on certain series. Some of the manga I'm going to be talking about today I've probably talked about on my channel before, so to keep myself from giving a full synopsis once again, I'm going to just put in the timestamps videos that I've talked about these series in full length before, so check the timestamps before you get into the video. I'll also be discussing what happens in each volume, so if you don't want to be spoiled, go ahead and skip ahead or just save this video entirely for later until you get to those volumes. With all that being said, let's just jump right into it and talk about manga I've been reading, plus one Manta comic. We're gonna start with two digital-only titles from Kodansha, the first of which being the third and final volume of Falling Drowning by Yuko Inari. When I saw that Kodansha had picked this one up for English, I was so excited because I really liked Inari's previous work, 10th You and I Fell in Love. I had also read a few chapters already of Falling Drowning online, so I did also know that I would enjoy this one already, but man, did it also just exceed my expectations. Since I have never talked about this series on my channel before, let me give a brief synopsis for anyone who might want to check it out first. It's a psychological romance drama series that follows the story of a second-year high schooler named Honatsu, who for the last 6 years has had amnesia. Something happened in her past that caused this, but she's not able to remember any of the events that led up to it. Her childhood friend Toma has always been around to help her, and a lot of people at their school seem to think they're dating because of this. However, Honatsu's not really sure about her feelings for him yet. But when a new transfer student, Shun, arrives at their school, Honatsu might be getting her memory back piece by piece. That's just a quick description, so if you don't want to be spoiled on the rest of this series, go ahead and skip past this because I'm going to be getting into what happens in the series now. This volume owes me money for my therapy bills. We finally figured out what happened in Honatsu's past, and I was not expecting to see everything. We got bits and pieces here and there, so I kind of knew that Honatsu's dad died trying to protect her, but I did kind of think it would be with a pool and not falling off an old building. Although since it was raining during the incident, I guess this is where Honatsu's PTSD with water came from. A lot of this last volume just had to do with showing what happened between the three kids and Honatsu's dad, and it was devastating. Starting with Honatsu and Shun realizing that they both had mutual feelings for each other, and as a last hurrah before Shun moves away, they go to an old building to hang out. Then right when she's about to tell Shun about her feelings, she slips off a rail and starts to fall off a building until her dad catches her, and then her dad can't pull himself up, but he can pull her up, so he pulls her up and then he falls off the building. Then we actually see the dad fall off the rail and we see Shun staring at him because he can't do anything, and this all happens before Honatsu slips and falls down the stairs when she gets the concussion that leads to her scattered memories. Shoujo manga is brutal sometimes. This all happens over 2 chapters, and the entire time, my heart was just in my stomach. The series does end on a higher note though. We don't spend the entire 3rd volume in the pits of despair, and for a 3-volume series, I would say it's overall got a very satisfying ending. Especially since I find that shorter manga series either have a very rushed last couple of chapters, or they just don't feel as tightly written as Falling Drowning does. There was no endgame couple for this series, which I felt really worked for the characters and the tone of the story as well. Honatsu and Toma were a couple for a little bit around volume 2, but the reason that Toma ended up wanting to break up with her did make a lot of sense because he felt like he was just being chosen because he was like the only one there for her for the entire 6 years, and now that she knows about Shun and now that she has kind of remembered a little bit about what happens, she's able to have a bigger support system. While Shun also confesses again by the end of the series, Honatsu kind of friend zones him in a way, basically just saying love is something that grows, and saying, hey, maybe in the future, but right now I just need to focus on like being myself. And I really like that for this series. It ends on a bit of a reset between the 3 friends, which I find was the best way to go after Honatsu learned what happened to her and her father. Overall, this series was another great short and sweet story from Yuko Inari. The tension was built up really well through the 3 volumes, and I also find the ending to be pretty satisfying for a short series. The last volume definitely solidified itself as being like a go-to to recommend a shorter series to someone. I do also think it would be cool if we could get this series in a physical omnibus because it's so short, but I'm not gonna hold my breath on that one. Definitely check out Falling Drowning if you're looking for a psychological drama manga because it's got some fantastic artwork and just a great story. The second digital-only title I read was the new release of Kiss with a Cat, which I've talked about in another video before. I was already immensely enjoying this series, but this new volume, oh my god. It was so ridiculously funny. The amount of times I had to look away from my screen and just scream, what is happening? Because of how crazy a scene was. For anyone who doesn't know what this manga is about, and you're about to watch me talk about it without any context, you are going to be so utterly confused. The volume starts with Arina and Nekoyama realizing they have mutual feelings for each other, and then from there just kind of like couple shenanigans of them trying to work around the fact that anytime Arina kisses Nekoyama, he turns into a cat. The funniest part of this entire volume is that they're working around the fact that anytime Nekoyama turns back into a human from being a cat, he's butt naked. So they'll be trying to make out, and then all of a sudden he's a cat, and then he's naked, and then he's a cat, and then he's naked. I was just crying laughing from how funny these chapters were. I literally brought this series up in my rating for it from an 8 out of 10 because that's just how good this volume was. We also find out that the only way that Nekoyama can stop turning into a cat when they kiss is if they do the deed. This new bit of information led to one of the funniest lines I've ever seen, as well as just the funniest out of context image. I imagine this is how the series is gonna end now, since they did just announce that volume 6 is gonna be the last in the series, which is a huge bummer. I am enjoying this one so much, and so many of my favorite series have just been ending lately, just out of nowhere, seemingly. Koi no Hajimari, Ferrari Girl, Colette Decides to Die, My Love Mix-Up, Hayakushi Tai Futari, they're all ending. This whole volume of Kiss with a Cat really did remind me of Ferrari Girl at times, with its like hormone-filled comedic moments. There's something about awkward new love that just makes comedy moments 10 times funnier, and I think it's the secondhand embarrassment that really does me in every time. Normally, it isn't even something that I like in a series, cause like, I could barely get through The Office, but I guess in romance, I think it's hilarious. This volume was just like laugh out loud funny though. I really enjoyed the turn that this series took. So make sure you guys check out Kiss with the Cat if you haven't already. All right, that's the end of our digital titles. So we're gonna get into some physical manga I've read, starting with volume 7 of The King's Beast, which is from the Shoujo Beat imprint. I actually read this one 2 months ago whenever it released. However, I figured I would talk about this instead of the volume 7 release of Prince Freya, which just came out, because I had less to say about that volume and I have more to say about this one since there was a big event that happened in it. I've also just never talked about The King's Beast on my YouTube yet, so I figured I might as well talk about it now since this volume was so good. It's a fantasy romance mystery series that serves as kind of a spin-off of Dawn of the Arcana, if you guys remember that Shoujo Beat title as well. However, if you want to read The King's Beast, you don't have to read Dawn of the Arcana first. They don't share any characters or similar plot lines, so if you go into The King's Beast, you won't be confused. You don't have to read Arcana first, just so you know. It's just kind of set in like the same universe. The quick synopsis for this series is that it follows a half-beast, half-human Ajin named Rangetsu, whose twin brother Sogetsu was tested for magical abilities and made to serve in the royal court. But one day, Rangetsu finds out that Sogetsu was brutally He was moited. But one day, Rangetsu finds out that Sogetsu was brutally murdered when he was serving in the court, and she vows to take revenge on the prince who he was serving under that she suspects had a hand in his death. Up until now, I was enjoying The King's Beast and I liked it, but there was nothing that really made me go, oh wow, I'm really into this. Until this volume. Volume 7 is exactly what this manga needed to get me hooked into the series, especially because now it's getting more into the lore and the magical powers and setting up the mystery even further. We also got a lot of development, not just with the story, but with Prince Tenyo and Rangetsu's relationship as well, which I think was a great addition to this volume because otherwise it would have been so heavy. Somehow I've really enjoyed their relationship so far because even though they have like a master-servant relationship on top of also liking each other, the power imbalance doesn't feel like it's there because Prince Tenyo is just such a kind person. I'm gonna get into non-vague spoilers now because I really want to talk about like where this series is going from here. So we find out in this volume that Rangetsu was also born with magical ability and that her power is the ability to heal from poisons or deep wounds. We find this out when Rangetsu basically begs another Ajin to test whether or not she can die by cutting her neck. This realization that Rangetsu is basically immortal leads to the realization that Sogetsu probably didn't die and that he's most likely immortal as well and being held captive by the king to like run tests on him. This twist was so unexpected that I actually gasped when I read this part. I guess I also kind of forgot that Sogetsu was supposed to have magical ability, but because they hadn't mentioned like what his ability was, it just slipped my mind. But like now I'm like, oh yeah. It's all coming together. I imagine from here we're going to be getting into trying to save Sogetsu from the king who's like trying to steal the secrets of immortality from him. However, from there I'm really not sure where the series is going to go because if Rangetsu and Sogetsu get found out that they're both immortal, they are in no way going to be able to stay in the royal court. If I remember right, Dawn of the Arcana ended in a pretty bittersweet way, so I'm like kind of sure that this series will also end bittersweet, whether that means Prince Tenyo and Rangetsu can't be together or something happens to Sogetsu. We'll find out. The King's Beast really just hooked me in this volume, and ever since I finished reading it, I've had all these questions like swirling around in my head of what's gonna happen next. Especially since I did not expect this from this series. I really thought it was going to be like a run-of-the-mill murder mystery. But I am loving the turn that this manga took, and I cannot wait for the next volume to release. Alright, so next we have another Shoujo Beat title, which is volume 15 of Queen's Quality that just came out in the beginning of September. I was so excited for volume 15 because after volume 14 there was so much anxiety I was feeling about where the series was going. And after reading this volume, all of my anxieties did not go away. They are still very much there. Since I've made an entire volume on Queen's Quality already, I will send you guys there, so I'm just gonna go ahead and get right into discussing this volume. QQ has always been pretty heavy on the subject matter, but this one really just was driving a stake through my heart. Kyutaro has really been going through it, and this volume was no exception. We've found out that Kyutaro is basically going to be eaten away from the inside by the snake that is possessing him until there is nothing left of his memories or himself. Earlier, I said I read one of the funniest lines in a series for Kiss with a Cat, but for Queen's Quality, I think I've read one of the most heart-wrenching lines in this volume. Seeing Kyutaro just like having to grapple with his mortality while he's just a teen, it's just heartbreaking. I really was holding out hope that Fumi and Kyutaro were gonna have some sort of happy ending in this series, but I don't even know anymore. Each new volume is just making me less and less hopeful. Ever since like volume, like 10 or 11, I've been like, oh, this is gonna end horribly, isn't it? Like, I really do have the feeling that Kyutaro is either not gonna be saved at all and the snake is just gonna completely take over him, or only his true self can like live with inside of him, and the only way Fumi and he can meet up in the future is like if she goes into his mind palace, basically. Those are like the only ways I can see how the series will end with like where it is right now. Obviously, like I don't know for sure still because we only just started learning about the powers and capabilities that the snakes have. So maybe with like new information or when we learn more about their powers, we can like get something that will save Kyutaro, but I genuinely don't think that's gonna happen. I'm gonna keep saying it. I am worried. I am so worried. Every new release makes me more worried. The other big thing that happened in this volume is that we are starting a new arc that seems to be involving the main antagonist more often, as well as involving the Byakko clan into the story again. QQ has definitely gotten a lot more action and plot oriented since like volume 9, and I would say the last 2 releases have definitely been like proof of that. There was a lot of intense action in the last volume, while in this one, it was much more plot oriented and trying to catch us up with where the series is going to be going in the future. The series has had less of a focus on the mental health aspects, especially since we've closed the door on the bug handler arc in the early volumes. But I think with what's happening with Kyutaro and him having to deal with like his mental health while he grapples with death, I think we're going to be getting more of a mental health aspect in that regard on like mortality and like what it means to truly be yourself. I'm really looking forward to the next volume because in the very last page of volume 15, they introduced the idea that the Byakko clan can open up the gates to hell, which is a very cool like new turn for the action to go in. I know we're focused on Kyutaro's arc right now because he's got all the snake issues going on, but I do hope we get some more Fumi content in the future. Like, she's still doing stuff and she's still present, but ever since volume 10, where her arc kind of like wrapped up, she's had not as much focus. So I hope we go back to that soon. So let's next get into one of the non-shoujo series that I was reading from Viz recently, and that is Golden Kamuy. I'm still slowly getting through this manga, but because I watched the anime first, I will still be watching season 4, even if I'm not like entirely caught up to that part of the series yet. I'm so excited to see where the series goes in the anime, and then I'll be even more excited to get all the context and things that they cut out when I read the manga for those parts. Which has just generally been how I've been consuming this series, which is like liking the anime, but being like kind of confused sometimes, and then going and reading the manga and getting bits and pieces that like were kind of crucial for context and being like, oh, okay, that's why that happened. Anyway, since I haven't really talked about Golden Kamuy before, here's a quick plot synopsis once again. It's an action and historical seinen manga series about a man named Sugimoto Saichi, who was kicked out of the military for assaulting an officer. He needs to make money to support his childhood best friend's wife, who has lost her eyesight. But when panning for gold wasn't cutting it, he hears a tale about a hidden Ainu treasure that can only be found by collecting the tattooed skins of former prisoners. This isn't like the best description, but I wanted to keep it concise. Now, volume 8 and 9 were both pretty good and get much more into the part of the story that I enjoy, which is when Sugimoto and Ashripa start teaming up with other groups depending on circumstances. I will say I've never been a huge fan of the Hijikata Toshizo parts of the manga, but I don't really mind his crew being present when Sugimoto like joins up with them. I just feel like alone, he doesn't bring as much personality as the other group leaders do, like Sugimoto or Tsurumi. For volume 8, it mostly focuses on the taxidermy guy who has the weird fetish, and honestly, I hate when the tattooed prisoners are like little weirdos. Sometimes they can be funny like Ienaga or Ushiyama, but for the most part, I'm just like uncomfortable with these people. Like Shiraishi's a little weirdo, but it's not to the extent that I'm hoping he leaves as soon as he's on the screen or page, whichever. And the taxidermy guy isn't even the worst of the tattooed criminals that I've met so far, because Henmi takes the cake for that one. Taxidermy guy just makes me uncomfortable, and I'm glad he gets axed pretty quickly in this volume. I really enjoyed volume 9 though, because there was a lot of cut content from the anime in this one. Mostly a lot of Shiraishi backstory, which I don't think was in season 2 of the anime, if I remember correctly, but it was just a nice addition to his character to kind of like see how he became the Escape King. I also really like the chapters where Sugimoto and gang end up in an Ainu village that was taken over by former prisoners who are masquerading as Ainu. This leads to a really great moment at the very end of this volume of Ashripa realizing how brutal Sugimoto can be. And while I feel like they do show that in the anime, they don't really show how scared Ashripa actually can be of him. Obviously, she's not like outright scared of Sugimoto, but there's moments where Sugimoto obviously is like going over the top that she's just like, this is him. This is how he can be. As much as I did love the anime, I feel like it does kind of cut out moments that are very helpful for context that just end up leaving me confused if I don't read the manga. I remember when I first started watching the anime, I was so confused as to why Sugimoto was going to all these lengths to help this random soldier that was in the military with him for like taking care of his wife. And then I read the manga and I'm like, oh, they were best friends. That's why. The manga just makes things make so much sense sometimes. So if you liked the anime, but you felt like there was like something missing, I would definitely say read the manga because it gives you a little bit more detail and information onto certain things or like how characters got to a place. Last up for the physical manga series that I've read, we have the new Yen press release, No Longer Heroine, or as I knew it in high school, Heroine Shikaku. Yeah, so this series came out in the early 2010s and I read it when it was releasing online. So I was very excited to see it got licensed because I've been wanting to give this one a reread for a while now. I also remember liking this one a lot. Like, I remember it being one of my favorite series when I was reading it. The first volume sets up the manga pretty well, and while I know a lot happens later in the series, it still gives you a good enough inkling of what's in store. The story follows our heroine Hattori, who has had a crush on her childhood friend Rita ever since she can remember. However, Rita is a serial dater and has a new girlfriend like every week. This won't stop Hattori though, because she believes that she's the heroine in her and Rita's love story, and that he's just gonna confess to her when the time is right. A problem arises though when Rita gets a girlfriend that's much different than his usual type, and this time he seems to be serious as well. But will this stop Hattori from pursuing him further or believing that they're destined for each other? If you can't tell, this series is a romance comedy with heavy reliance on parodying like shoujo romance tropes or just regular romance tropes in general. One look at all of the references in just volume 1 of this series, from Kimi ni Todoke to Attack No. 1 to Studio Ghibli works, you can tell this manga wants to take familiar tropes and turn them on their head. Hattori herself is very aware of shoujo manga tropes in this series, so even if you don't understand a reference or a trope, Hattori will make sure to let you in on that because she herself views herself through the lens of being a shoujo manga protagonist. Aside from that, Hattori is a pretty likable and unlikable character at the same time. She's pretty clearly self-centered, but at the core of her character, she's not a bad person, she's just very misguided in her infatuation. Her obsession with Rita comes from possessiveness, however, she also does care for him. I think it's also pretty clear that Rita is super self-centered as well. There's times in the first volume already that he puts Hattori over his girlfriend. So clearly there's something going on with these two where they're both very self-centered, but at the same time they have this like unshakable bond, I guess. It does feel like a very high school kid thing to do though. I feel like Hattori and Rita both act like high schoolers. I remember that there's a lot that goes on later in the series, but I don't want to talk about that at all, just in case anyone who is reading this has started reading it for the first time, because not everyone is like me and has read a bunch of series from 2010 online. Just buckle up for a wild ride because you guys are in for a roller coaster. Personally, I'm approaching the second read-through through the lens of like being a parody comedy series and not just a straight up romance. I know a lot of people don't like this series right now, but I think if you go into this manga with through the lens of seeing it as more of a comedy or like taking tropes and turning them on their head, I feel like the series does become a lot more enjoyable. So I'm hoping if I view it that way, I'm gonna still really like this series this time around as well. Then real quick, last thing I want to talk about is the Manta Comic series I've been reading, Lady Devil. Huge thank you to my friend Fizzy over on Twitter, who has been hyping this series up so much that I just had to check it out. And I'm so glad I did. This series is just fucked up. So if you guys are wanting to go and read this one, make sure to check the trigger warnings first. There's a lot of things happening in the series that could trigger someone, so please check those first before checking the series out. Now, the plot is a lot to recap, and I do almost think that people should go into the series knowing nothing about it. However, I'm gonna try my best to give a synopsis. It's a fantasy psychological romance series about a woman named Giovanetta who's been all but confined in her room. She's supposed to be married off to a decrepit old king as a peace treaty for war. However, she would rather summon a demon than marry him. No, literally. Her family has a crypt that holds 7 coffins containing pieces of a demon that when you break the seal and make a wish, your wish is granted. Sort of like a monkey's paw situation, but like a demon's leg. Once Giovanetta breaks the seal and wishes for her marriage to end, something starts to happen to her twin brother, Johannes. I'm gonna leave the synopsis as that because I really do think the less you know about this series going into it, the better. It was so intense from the start of season 1 to the end of season 2 that it was just really hard to stop reading it. The character dynamics are just so insanely well thought out and carefully crafted that every new development or personality shift really just makes sense for each character, as well as the twisting and turning in the story being so perfectly done that every new piece of information you get, if you go back and you add that new context to that moment, everything starts to be more clear. You can analyze a character interaction in a new way. You can analyze a character narration in a new way. It's just, I love when series do that. And I think that's why I am enjoying Lady Devil so much, because in that kind of way, it reminds me of Cheese in the Trap, where we get a lot of present day things first, and then we get flashbacks and they don't necessarily make sense. But then when you get later in the series, these flashbacks start to make more sense because we have all this new context and information. I am hooked on this series and I cannot stop thinking about it ever since I finished season 2. I still haven't stopped thinking about it. I'm thinking about it every waking moment right now. It's so just like gloriously messed up and just amazing storytelling. I highly recommend if you guys are able to handle the triggers that are in this series. And those are the few series that I've read in the past 2 months or so. I did want to keep it more to series I haven't talked about yet, but when it comes to Kiss with a Cat and Queen's Quality, I could not talk about those new volumes. They were just so good. Personally, like I said, I do enjoy making more essay content, but this is nice every now and then, just like hanging out and talking and being a person. I also just really needed a breather from the seriousness of the last video, which I should say, thank you guys so much for your support on that video. I cannot tell you guys how anxious I was to put that one out, so it really just means the world to me that, like, for the most part, everyone was very supportive, and it just made me so happy, and like, my anxiety was almost instantly relieved just seeing the kindness that you guys had. I was really proud of that video. I was really proud of the work that I put into that video and the research that I did and being able to say my piece. And so it was just really nice to see the overwhelming positivity from a lot of you guys. So once again, thank you so much for making me feel reassured. Anyway, that is all for today. As always, I appreciate my hojos for watching. Read Chihaya Furu, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Alright, so what's the Sugimoto pose for chapter 98 like? Alright, put the side by side. That's how we end the video.